This is a Super Sabre Society video of the month. Okay, we're here in Litchfield Park, Arizona with a couple of old icons, Hank Canterbury and Jim Johnston. And I do mean old, and I do mean icons in this business. So take a look here. Hank, how in the heck did you get into aviation? Where'd you grow up and all that?
I grew up in Huntsville, Alabama, and went to the first class in the Air Force Academy, as you painfully probably remember as your upperclassman for a short time. And I graduated in '59, and I was fortunate enough to go to pilot training and get to choose an F-100 Super Sabre as my weapon system.
All right, well, so you'd do anything to get out of Alabama, even go to the first class of the academy, huh?
Yeah, even if I had to put up with the likes of all that stuff.
How about you, Jim?
I'm an ROTC graduate out of Texas Tech, and got to choose my F-100 right out of Webb Air Force Base. I told my wife we were going to see the world, so we went from Lubbock, Texas to Big Spring. From there out here to Greater Luke, and from there into F-100s at Homestead, Florida. Having a great time, getting ready to go to Vietnam, and somebody said, "Oh no, Lieutenant, you're going to go fly an A-1." So that was my Vietnam experience.
We're going to ask you about that. The A-1 had to be quite a... So where'd you go to pilot training, Hank?
I went to Vance, Oklahoma, and that's where I graduated and got the F-100, and came out to Luke for the training, Nellis stop-off. Went to Germany, Spangdahlem, and flew the F-100 over there in the nuclear alert role and close air support during the Berlin crisis and the Cuban crisis. Came back after having checked out at Spangdahlem in the F-105. And a short time thereafter, I was selected for the Thunderbirds in 1965 and 66. And flew the F-100 during that time. Leaving there, went to Vietnam for my first tour in 67, 68 at Benoit.
Ah, so now the A-1. So from jets to the A-1.
Jets to A-1. Thought my throat had been cut, but they picked about 4 of us out of the 81st Wing and said, "You guys are going to go over." I was an advisor. Good buddy Butch Vasilio took a long course, and he and I ended up over there about the same time that the first bunch from our wing was arriving in Vietnam. I flew the A-1 there for a year with 5/16 out of Da Nang. From there, went back and instructed the Vietnamese mostly at Hurlburt, and from there played horseholder a little bit, got into flying Sabre liners for the TOC and SOF commander, and then a guy by the name of Oles called me one day and said, "I understand you're an T-39 IP, and I need one, as much as I'm embarrassed to say." So he brought me out to the Air Force Academy, and I was designated an AOC of the 40th Squadron at the Academy, and spent about 3.5 years doing that. Great privilege to sit in a T-39 cross country with Robin Oles and hear the great tales, and I felt like that he and I really became some good friends at that time, even though I never flew with him in combat.
All right, I'm sure. How about Hank, how about the Thunderbird tour? Tell us about the Thunderbird tour. What it was like.
Well, it was a real dream of mine from the very first day that the Academy opened, when all the Air Force airplanes flew by the ceremony at Lowry Air Force Base in July of 1955, when we first went out there. Well, in that flyby was Bill Creech and Billy Ellis and a couple of the real original Thunderbird members, and they flew by as part of all the hundreds of airplanes that the Air Force used to have in those days. And I thought to myself, as a cadet, new cadet, that wouldn't it be something if I could be maybe one of the first Academy graduates to be on the Thunderbird. Had no earthly idea that that was going to happen. And of course, a lot of wickets had to be gotten through before that, like for instance to graduate from that place. Well, I managed to do that, got pilot training, and lo and behold, put in for it and got selected. And so it was a wonderful tour. We traveled all over the country. We have the record in those 2 years of flying the most air shows of any team since the team was created.
Wow.
Over 120 shows each year.
So you were in the A-1s, you were an advisor at Da Nang, advising Vietnamese pilots.
That's right. Yep.
What kind of pilots were they? What was their attitude about the war?
The attitude was generally pretty good. They liked to fly as long as it was day VFR. They were terrible instrument pilots. They were either really good or really bad. The more senior pilots had so much A-1 time. Which room do you want to bomb in? They could put it right there. Later, the younger guys coming along really didn't have a feel for it. As you know, we had to have them sit on pads and put pedal blocks on the rudder pedals so that they could reach that, and so that was sort of interesting. And more than once, I've watched them ground loop that big airplane.
You were on linebacker too. You were there early in the war, and then also later in the war, at the end of the war, sort of.
Yes, I went back in 1972 as a TDY Christmas help from TAC. I took the 308 Squadron from Homestead, Florida, which is flying the F-4E, and we went over and got there just in time to be put in new guy school before the linebacker 2 kicked off after the bombing pause. And lo and behold, the next morning I found out that I was in the first flight leading the chaff flight downtown Hanoi and the first set of bombers that came in. That was a very exciting time, and I thought that was going to be the end of it, but obviously it wasn't. The chaff and the pods and the ECM worked a hell of a lot better than it did in previous years.
So you were there at the end of the war. You must be the guy that lost the war then, right?
I had to be the last one out. The door hit me in the butt, I suppose, but we were pretty close. After that, we spent the whole 6 months after the linebacker terminated, and we got our prisoners back. And we still continue to fly in all countries over there with the remnants of the war that trailed on for quite some time, both Cambodia, Laos, and South Vietnam.
What'd you do after you finished at the academy? Did you retire then?
Finished the academy, went back for a second tour, checked out, and did a Cat 4 checkout in F4s, went back to Udon and Tani. And Hank had made such a mess of things over there, I guess. It was about all over but the shouting, so we did not fly a single combat mission in my year at Udon, but we did manage to flunk an ORI. They decided in their esteemed wisdom that we'd have an ORI there, so that was not taken seriously by the higher-ups, and we got to do 2 ORIs, as a matter of fact.
What'd you do after you retired
In 1 year. Well, before I retired, I was fortunate enough to run into Hank Canterbury out here. He was the Air Division commander at Luke, and he brought me in out here as vice commander for F-15 wing, and then fired me from that in about 2 or 3 months and gave me the 58th attack training wing here in F-16s. So I became the F-16 wing commander when we built the 4 squadrons here, and then I moved in F-16s up to 388th, followed Jim Record, good friend of mine up there, and from there TAC IG and F-16s. I retired in 1992 as vice commander of 5th Air Force, and at that time I was still flying F-16s, F-15s, and had even checked out in a Huey, which is the most humbling experience a fighter pilot could ever have, was learning to hover that son of a gun.
Not a bad life, but anybody whose wings swing above their head is not a normal person anyway. So. Hank, what'd you do after you rose to high rank? What'd you do after you retired then?
I wouldn't say it was high rank, but after the combat tours and the usual 2 tours in the Pentagon, the National War College, etc., I got picked to be the wing commander at MacDill, which had about 190 F-4s at the time, and I converted that wing to the F-16s, 1979 through 1982. Then I was assigned out here at Luke, and I converted the F-4 wing. We had F-15s and F-4s and F-5s. I converted the the F-4 wing here at Luke, 58, into F-16s. Thereafter, I had a couple of other assignments and wound up retiring in 1989 after being the deputy commander of CENTCOM and vice commander 9th Air Force as a 2-star. And since retirement, I've done nothing but fly, train, enjoy life, and love the experience of going back and remembering all the great Americans that I flew with during the F-100 years and the other fighter years. I truly flew with some of our world's greatest pilots.
Well, both of you did, obviously. It was a good time. So as you look at the modern Air Force, the changes since our time and what have you, what kind of message do you have for the young kids coming up, Jim?
The young kids have a tough road to hoe. We had a heck of a lot more fun flying and fighting and those kind of things that they're even allowed to even think about now. So it's a different world. But we've got to continue to have these kids recognize that they are out there serving our country, as miserable and long-term TDYs that they're having and so on. But it's a different world, and it's kind of hard for us to bite the bullet and watch what's going on right now with the reduction in force and so on. You know, when I was fortunate enough to be promoted in 2007, we had 1 million members in the United States Air Force. look at what it is today.
Yep. We had 154 squadrons at the time of Desert Storm. We have 54 today. Hank, what's your final message to the kids out there?
Well, speaking of the kids out there, I have a son who's a full colonel and just finished a tour as a wing commander of the F-35 wing, the Air Force's only wing at the time, down at Eglin. So I've kept my finger on the pulse, so to speak, of what goes on. And as Jim just said, it's a different Air Force. It's significantly smaller. The mission is equally as critical as the times we did it. The guys out there are deadly serious about what they do, and they're very, very good. In fact, I would have to say that today's pilots and Air Force members are better than we ever thought about being. And the mission is still there. The Air Force has a critical job in national defense, and it needs continued attention.
Well, I thank both of you for what you did in bringing us up, teaching us to fly, making officers out of us, serving as examples, and keeping us alive. So it's great that you're both part of the Super Sabre Society, and thanks very much for the interview.
Thank you.
Thanks, Don. Great to be here today with this great group.